Up to you.
Good, I got it. Cool.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being here at the Sacred Grounds webinar series for gardening in a time of climate change. And this is, I'm Nikki with the Arizona Wildlife Federation, and working with Doug Bland of the Arizona Interfaith Power and Light. If you could wiggle your fingers there, Doug, and introduce everybody to you. We've got three marvelous speakers today. Let me give you a little bit of overview of what we're talking about. But first, I want to acknowledge where I'm at. I'm in Payson, Arizona. It's the traditional land of the Western Apache. And we have, our speakers are from all over Arizona and the country today, so very, very exciting. What we're going to be talking about is gardening in a time of climate change. There's lots of wonderful ways that gardens can help mitigate climate change, but also how gardeners are this part of the scientists for gathering the data about climate change as well. So we're going to talk about all those things today. And also the spiritual side of gardening and how it helps to care for creation. So we're really excited about this wonderful discussion today. And I'm going to get us going pretty quickly. You're welcome to say hi in the chat. Send it to everyone. Hopefully that's an option for you all. We'd love to hear where you're coming from. And as the chat goes on today, you'll see different links from us to some of the resources that our speakers are talking about. So if you don't know how to get to chat, you just kind of hover your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom screen and chat will show up there. There's also a button called reactions. You're welcome to, there's a little fireworks, there's some raised hands, there's some thumbs up, and so you're welcome to get our attention that way as well. Thank you, Doug. All right. Okay, so let me tell you who's on board with us today. One is Ellie. She has the hand clap. She had the cute little heart just a second ago on her screen. Ellie is our guy in the chair helping us out today, our person in the chair. So any technical difficulties, you're welcome to send it to her and she will help out on that for sure. And then our speakers today, we're going to start with LoriAnne Barnett. She's with the National Phenology Network, and I'm going to let her talk all about what she's going to do today rather than giving her, thank you, LoriAnne, she's got the fireworks up. And then we also have Nona Siegel from the Arizona Interfaith Power and Light, and she's got a wonderful story for us today, her personal journey here. And then Tiffany Carey is joining us today from Detroit, Michigan. And she's with the National Wildlife Federation's Sacred Grounds program, excuse me, that's launching nationwide. So we're really excited to hear what that's going to look like. And I'm with the Arizona Wildlife Federation. As I said, we're the state affiliate with the National Wildlife Federation. And I'm an avid gardener. Did a lot of gardening in Sedona, Arizona, and then also in Phoenix and now in Payson. It's really nice to get to know so many different ecosystems, so we can bring that up as well. And oh gosh, so what we're going to do, our little bit of a layout for our program today is each of our speakers is going to talk for about 15 minutes, and you are welcome to ask a question in the chat. Ellie's going to be kind of minding those and probably grouping some of them if some of them seems to be some of the same questions. And then at the end, we're going to have about 10 minutes for questions that you can put to the panel or to individuals. So we'll doing most of our questions at the end, but if there's something pressing, feel free to chime right in with that. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it right over to LoriAnne. Thank you so much for being here, LoriAnne. It's all you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen. All right. Can you all see my slideshow? Ta-da! All right. I'm also going to reveal the chat box in case you all have a question for me. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am LoriAnne Barnett. I use the pronouns she, her, and I have a couple of different positions here in the state of Arizona. I am going to talk to you today about the Nature's Notebook Citizen Science Program, which really is a great tool to use when you're out in the garden. I'm also the director of the Arizona Master Naturalist Association, and my day job right now is I am an urban forestry specialist with the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So natural resources is totally my jam. I am talking to you from Tucson, and that is from the sacred lands of the indigenous folks from the Tohono O'odham and Hohokam and Pasquayaqui lands. And I always like to recognize that they've stewarded this land in Tucson since time immemorial. I remember their connection to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to live, work, and learn and gather on their traditional homelands. So that is where I am right now, although it looks like I'm sitting in front of the Grand Canyon. I just happen to like that picture. But let me tell you a little bit about the National Phenology Network. I spent 10 years as their education director and just recently switched positions. But I am someone that has definitely advocated for paying attention to your place, making observations in your garden, and just really understanding what's going on around you. I think that's how you create meaning and make meaning in your life. And my role with the National Phenology Network really was to help other people see the benefits of making observations in nature and recording them somewhere. I know a lot of folks are really great at nature journaling and writing down what they do outside and what they're doing in their garden. And that is something that I think brings a lot of joy to people. It helps people be centered. It helps them really understand their place and their space. And it also helps them remember what happens from season to season or from year to year. And the reason we can do that is because there are very observable stages, life cycle stages of plants and animals that we can see and document. And that's what's called phenology. So that's the technical term that we use to describe life cycle events of plants and animals. Whenever people see phenology, they often think of phrenology. But I think in the last 10 years that I've been doing this, people have gotten less and less, thinking that that's what I'm talking about. I went to several conferences and people wrote that on my name tag, like they thought I was from the National Phenology Network. And I said, no, that's a different thing. That's pseudoscience. But what is phenology? Phenology is from the Greek word pheno, meaning to show or appear. And so that's where it's talking about those life cycle events that appear during certain times of each season. And they happen regularly, and their relationship is really intertwined with what's going on in the weather, the temperature, all of that. And that's how we really understand what's going on in nature. And our folks that we live among now, the indigenous folks, have been doing this for centuries. So time immemorial is really how we would describe that. And traditional ecological knowledge is grounded in storytelling, and it's grounded in understanding what was happening all year, not just because people needed to know that to survive, although that was part of it, but also that's how, traditional folks will relate to nature because they're a part of it. We are all a part of nature. Everything is related, and I wholeheartedly believe that. So that's kind of a foundational belief with indigenous folks. And some of the books that we have now coming out, people have been writing stories about what's going on in nature for years and years. I like to point people to these several authors that I have listed here, and then it's not just Native Americans that were paying attention to that, even folks that came here from the colonies across, despite all the work that they did to, kind of suppress the indigenous folks that have been here for such a long time. Everybody's been paying attention to what's going on in nature for a very long time, and they've used that to guide them through their daily work. And some of these things might be something that you're familiar with, the different full moons of the season, because something happened in nature right around the time that those moons appear each month. And that's how people marked time, is just to kind of understand what was coming next. Something like the harvest moon or the beaver moon allows you to think about what needs to happen during that time frame. And there's probably a lot of stories that you all tell, if you're gardeners, about what to do next in nature. So these are some of the things that people have written down and said, harvest the corn when oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear, or once lilac flowers have faded, plant squash and cucumbers. So that's really how they thought about organizing their time and space, especially when there were not so many distractions around us. Like, we're all here on Zoom, which is fantastic, but spending time outside, I think, is important. And, just remembering that you are a part of your nature space is really a different experience than most people have nowadays. And hopefully, even though we're all kind of sequestered in this pandemic situation, we can maybe take some time to go outside and think about what's coming next for the season, wherever you are. And, understanding phenology now is really something that is useful to human culture, because a lot of things are tied to phenology. So our health, this virus that we're talking about now, has the phenological stages and events, just like everything else. Resource management is also critically tied to understanding the timing of phenology of certain plants and animals. Conservation and agriculture, where our food comes from. Obviously, it's all related to, how long the growing season is in certain places, what you can plant where, and what kind of things grow and bloom, and what pests appear at certain times, given the timing of each season. And, having an understanding of these things is really what is kind of critical to understanding how climate change is affecting our planet's species. So the National Phenology Network is kind of really engaged in the scientific research of understanding what's happening in any given space, and also how that might be different from how it was last year, last season, and how it was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And because people have documented this information, then they have a really great resource to look and see, when things happened then, and they can compare it to now. And what we are really seeing is that there are some shifts in the timing of our species phenology. And it's really an issue when you think about the interactions between species, because again, everything is reliant upon each other in the ecosystem. So in this example that I have here, it's describing how a migratory bird species in Europe is arriving at its spot at the same time that it always has for a really long time. But because the temperatures had warmed, the plants and the insects had already advanced beyond, the stage of using them when they were able to feed it to their young. And so they got there, and there aren't any food sources left for that particular bird species that feeds on caterpillars. So all of those things are tied and shifting. And because we've got that written down, we can really see, where the differences are, and start to understand, well, is there something that we can do to help? And all of it is really relying upon making careful observations in nature. So again, it's a very spiritual experience to sit outside and just sit in your backyard. I mean, I do that every morning with my coffee when it's not 40 degrees out, because I'm a wimp and I live in Tucson. But for most of the year, I'm able to sit on my patio and just sit there and watch the birds and, write down what I see. This year in particular, we did see a lot of different migratory species coming through our yard. And I think that was because we have carefully over the last couple of years cultivated an ecosystem that has a lot of native plants that are available for, nectar feeding insects and birds to enjoy the fruits in the backyard. And that's really where I think my passion is, because I am tied to my little space in my house. I'm not really feeling bad that I haven't been able to go anywhere in months and months, because I've got an abundant, backyard that I've cultivated and watched grow. And because we've planted a lot of things like milkweeds and a lot of the native plants like our devil's claw and things like that, we really saw a lot more hummingbirds this year than we've seen in the past. We saw a lot more queen and monarch butterflies on those milkweeds because we were making them available, and it's a nice stop. I live fairly close to the Tucson Botanical Garden, and I like to say that I think a lot of the folks, or a lot of the species that pass by our yard are on the way to the Botanical Garden, because obviously they have like a much better and bigger space with a lot of plants and other things for things to feed on. So I'm just kind of like a stop on the way. But I think that's really important because having these places that are connecting the ecosystem and having the resources for plants and animals to have food to survive along the way, especially if they're migratory species, is really important. And that's, I know we'll talk about that in a little bit with the National Wildlife Federation habitat certification. That's really what we want to see. We want to see a lot of these places where we're able to have this. And even if you have to have it in pots, I think that's okay. My space is very urban because I do live downtown, but here's an example of all the things that we saw. We do have a desert tortoise that lives here. She didn't just sort of wander in because our yard is walled in, but she thrives because we have planted a lot of the species that she enjoys if she would be browsing out in nature. So I think that's really important. And the fact that I can write that down and remember, oh, this is when the milkweed opened this year, and this is when it flowered. This was the first year we had some of those tarantula hawks come to the pollen on the milkweed. And that was, my husband and I were really excited because he's an entomologist and we're out there with our cameras trying to take pictures of it. But yeah, they came pretty regularly this year. And that's another thing that was the first time that we had it, even though we've been in this house for 10 years. So I guess they found us along the way. And the thing that we like to do with Nature's Notebook is note that if you are making observations anyway, and you're spending your time kind of taking stock of what's going on and when it's happening in your yard, the folks that are interested in studying these changes are really happy to have your data because that's where they can really understand or tell a story about what's been going on in nature. And the National Phenology Network is a curator of a data set now that's been around for 10 years. And so that's starting to uncover a lot of different patterns of things that we see. And we have other data sets that were brought into our database. Some of them have been around for 30 or 50 years. And having that available allows the folks at the National Phenology Network to not only tell stories about what's changing in certain areas, but also to create some tools that people can use to see, for example, when the onset of spring is going to happen. Based on what's happened in the past, they can calculate an average and they can tell you when spring's going to arrive in your backyard. And I think that's pretty cool because that really does help you, especially if you're a gardener and you want to know what time to plant something and you hadn't had that documentation in your space before. It really kind of helps you figure out when that is a good time to do that. So we've got a lot of people that are doing Nature's Notebook, not just in Arizona. We've got sites across the country where people have been collecting data pretty regularly in their backyards after gardening. And you can tell us the event. So if you see something, you tell us you see it by saying a yes. If you don't see something, it's also important to note that you didn't see it because negative data is also data. And that's what tells us when things stop and start. So if there's something that has phenophases that occur more than once in a year, and you're watching that plant for the whole year, you're going to capture that whole pattern of, when something leafed out, when it flowered, when it went dormant again. And the other thing that you can note is how many. So how many flowers were available for pollinators in your yard? How many birds did you see? How many caterpillars are there as a food source? All of that is just really important information. So this is just some data about how much data we have. And if anybody is, a scientist and they've done any sort of research, the more data you have, the better the story it's going to be able to tell. So encouraging people to write down what they see when they see it is really the important thing that we want folks to do. We have a mobile app, so it's really easy to go outside. Once you get used to taking observations, you can just punch it in and it takes literally less than 2 minutes. So I can sit there and have my coffee, then make my observations and, go and start doing my talk for later because I just have time to do that. And now the other thing, if you're not sure what to observe, we also have plenty of things to choose from on our website. There's right now about 1,400 species that you can pick. Not all of them are in Arizona, some of them are elsewhere, but they're spread across the country. And this is a good place to start also because our outreach coordinator, Erin, sends out pretty regular notations during the growing season about what each of these campaign species are doing. So how many observations were there? What does that mean? Is this different than last year? So your data really becomes part of something that's telling a bigger story. And the other one that I really like is the Nectar Connectors campaign, because that is really mapping the space where there is food availability for things like monarchs and other, migratory species that rely on these plants across the flyways and byways where they are traveling, as a migration species. And a lot of these are really beautiful plants that people want to have in their garden anyway. So they're very showy and they're very easy to observe because they have beautiful flowers. Sometimes they bloom more than once in the year. Sometimes they bloom consistently. So it's nice to be able to see what's happening when and where. The Green Wave campaign has a lot to do with the spring green up. So whenever the trees in the springtime are putting on their new leaves, if they're in a deciduous part of the world, we have a way to capture the data to see when it goes from like no buds on the plant until it has full leaf out, and then through the summer. And then the senescence at the end of the year is another thing when the leaves change color. That's another thing that people really like to observe. So I guess all of this is just to say that it's really easy to understand the phenology where you are, understand and view these things and observe them and document them. And when you do that, it is very useful for people that are interested in learning more about what's happening in a lot of different places, because not everybody can be everywhere, right? So I could, if Nikki was going to write down observations in her yard in Payson, I could see what's going on there if I wanted to understand, when her Palo Verdes were blooming versus when mine were blooming down here in Tucson. Although I don't think you have Palo Verdes in Payson, do you? No, you don't have Palo Verdes there. But you get my point. I can see and I can compare between where she is and where I am, and really start to get a picture of what's happening across the landscape, and think about what that means, for me, and when do I want to sit outside, and when do I want to make sure that I don't miss the blooms on my favorite plants. So anyway, if you have any questions or you want to participate in Nature's Notebook, you can go to our website that's there. I think I also put the USA National Phenology Network in the chat box already, so you can click on that as well. And Erin Posthumous, who's the outreach coordinator for the network, is more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Excuse me. She's the one that also does all of our newsletter communications and things like that. So if you're just interested in learning more about what Nature's Notebook's all about and how it's, the information in there is being used to better understand gardening and climate change, just hop on the newsletter, and she sends it out bi-monthly, and you can just learn a little bit more about what's going on in your area based on the data that people are collecting. So I shall stop talking now, unless anybody has a question for me. I think we're going to hold questions until the end, though. Is that right? I feel like we might have lost Nikki.
President Trump's attorney, former mayor.
Oh, I wonder. I know she was having internet issues.
She was.
Yeah.
I don't see her smiling face right this second either.
Oh, where'd she go?
I don't know.
We lost her. So do you want to go ahead, Tiffany? And
I'm going last. You can go ahead, Nona.
okay. All right. Oh, maybe she's back. Are you back, Nikki?
Not yet. No, shoot.
Almost.
Oh, here
There you
she
are.
is.
well, sorry, popping in and out. Yeah, Nona, we're ready for you.
Okay. Okay. My name is Nona Siegel, and I am the I'm here representing Arizona Interfaith Power and Light, which is a interfaith organization, which is our mission is a faith-based response to climate change, trying to remind folks who are involved in organized congregations of any sort that about what their ethical mandates might be from their organized religion, but also just to bring the spiritual component to this conversation. Sometimes it's a kind of a burnout situation to do advocacy for climate change, addressing climate change, and be in the ring of constant opposition and really wanting to find common ground with people. A spiritual place is one place that most people can make that connection in some way. And we have found through AZIPL that building those connections and really bringing people together around caring about the planet and addressing those issues works best from a more personal perspective. So I'm here to more tell a story than to give you facts and figures. I want to tell my personal story. We use Marshall Gantz's approach often. Doug, our leader, is a storyteller. He teaches storytelling, and he was a preacher. And so as a minister, you do a lot of storytelling too. And so he's inspired us to do a lot of our programming around the story of us, of me as an individual, the story of us together, the story of now, and bringing us into a place to work together. So I'm going to first talk about my gardening story. And I'm the daughter of a man who my father grew up in, very poor in upstate, in I would say backwoods. That sounds kind of derogatory, rural Minnesota, very poor, large family. And his family lived off the land. They grew what they had to eat. They canned everything, and they hunted for venison, and they fished, and that's how they lived. And so he was raised in a very evangelical family, and he was a very rebellious soul. So he left his family at a relatively young age to go west to Montana, and that's where I was born. I was born in Montana. My mother was a city girl, but my father taught me a deep respect for the land. And all this, all the species. We would walk around talking about plants all the time, talking about animals. I used to sit in front of a little sounds like I'm much older than I am, but we lived very primitively when I was little, and we didn't have electricity, and we didn't have running water. And I would sit under the ice box in our farmhouse, and I would play with the mice. And it was just a wonderful way to grow up. I think I probably developed a lot of immunity down there on the floor with the mice. But it was a way of really being in touch with the natural world and being somewhat at the mercy of its rhythms. But then my mother was a city girl, and my parents ended up separating, divorcing, and I ended up in Los Angeles as a 10-year-old. And I would go back and forth from the San Fernando Valley to Montana. And that was a real life lesson in itself. More than 1 million people in the San Fernando Valley, and Montana is the 4th largest state with not 1 million people in it at that point. So that juxtaposition was really, I think, made me deeply aware of what we were doing to the earth. And I decided to study conservation of natural resources. I started at UCLA, but they didn't have a program in the early 70s. And so then I went to Berkeley and studied conservation of natural resources there, and then decided to go to nursing school and do population health and try to encourage people to use family planning and have the babies they wanted to have and be thoughtful about their impact on the earth. And in all of that time, I really got farther away from gardening. I didn't learn as much of my father's skills as I would have liked to. And then in the busyness of life, and I was a nurse practitioner, there wasn't much time. And as I got older and I started working more with in advocacy for the environment, I really decided I needed to spend a lot more time with my hands in the dirt. And so I started to get more interested we have a food justice action team in our AZIPL state affiliate. And we've been encouraging community gardens. We've been encouraging congregational gardens. And in that work in my synagogue, we have a program with first graders. It's not happening in COVID, which has been a very sad loss, I think. But our first graders would come out with me once a month, and we would plant things, and we watch them grow, and then we would eat purple cauliflower, and then they would eat salad, and they wouldn't even want to go home because they were so busy eating salad, and that they grew and picked, and they were so excited about it. And that miracle of life is just so palpable and so present, and the little kids were so excited about it. And that was a really beautiful to be part of. And then I decided to take the Master Gardener class, which is interesting. I think I started the academic side of things versus the practical side. And so I got all this book knowledge, but I still need many years of practicing it to get good at it. I'm very humbled by the knowledge of all the gardeners. And I'm sure many of you in this group are very experienced gardeners. But it was amazing to meet people with such a passion for plants and for gardening, and to just sort of think of plants in a different way. And then in our work, I've worked with in AZIPL with some indigenous people who have been on our board and reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and taking another course another course that's led by an indigenous woman. I just am so deeply respectful of their connection to the land and their understanding of the interconnection of the spiritual and the physical, and the world we live in, and the way that we are part of it all. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic elementary school and high school. My husband's Jewish, and we raised our children Jewish, and I converted. And there's a lot in all of those faith traditions around the care for creation. I find that really all faith traditions, as we have worked in AZIPL, have a big component of care for the earth, connection to the earth, the importance of future generations. And I find that the indigenous writings just inspire me more deeply than I could imagine about how what it means to be that connected, to understand the corn and the all the components of your culture evolving around the natural world around you, and to have the deep respect that people have for that natural world. And I really feel like we have a lot to learn, a lot to learn in that regard. And I was just saying this morning, the Arizona Republic had a fabulous article about the Hopi, the effect on the Hopi people of the drought, and how its cultural effect, it's so much beyond the food component, and it's how vulnerable both to the pandemic and to the natural forces people are who live on the land, and how important that is to really be helping as much as we are able to support them in this time. But I think that I would just like to put a shout out for Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Love Letter to the Earth. And I know that the Dalai Lama just wrote a book this year that just came out about respecting the planet. And I have to say thank you to Pope Francis for all of his work with Laudato Si. So I think many, many faith traditions have worked really hard to have a really powerful component of caring for creation. And I think this Sacred Ground program that I think Tiffany's going to talk about as part of what she's talking about is just a really powerful program. And we're trying to look at participating from our synagogue. So I think that is a good transition to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nona. What a marvelous story about your background in gardening and connecting it with your faith. Thank you for sharing that. All right, next up is Tiffany Carey with the National Wildlife Federation. Thank you for being with us, Tiffany.
Awesome. No, it's great to be here. I am calling from maybe upper 30s. So you are calling from maybe some more hotter places, but I'm so glad and honored to be in this space, 6 p.m., but wouldn't have it any other way on a Sunday evening. So I am going to share my screen for my presentation here. Bring that down. Presenter mode. Can everyone see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, I'm ready for a thumbs up. Okay, good. So I am Tiffany Carey. I am the Senior Education Engagement Coordinator at the National Wildlife Federation out of the Great Lakes Regional Center. And the Great Lakes Regional Center is actually located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, if you all are kind of familiar with the Midwest. And I am actually working from home since March. So I have been in Detroit since kind of COVID has hit this past year. Next slide. So a little bit about National Wildlife Federation, if you don't know. It's an 83-year-old conservation organization that really the theme and the mission is uniting all Americans and folks in the country to ensure wildlife is thriving in a rapidly changing world. And we've done a few different kind of approaches to this, right? So you may know about Ranger Rick. It's one of the first nature children's magazines in the country. Really, really cool, actually magazine that ranges from, I think, like 0 all the way up to kind of middle-aged high school age groups. So this is really an awesome organization that's really ranged in policy work, youth engagement, as well as transforming wildlife conservation through advocacy and gardens, right? So our Garden for Wildlife program, which really helps with certifications, and we have hundreds of thousands of people who have been engaged with this work across the country for several decades. So the mission of National Wildlife Federation, just to read it off, is we believe that in order to save wildlife and ourselves, we need to ensure that all people have access to clean water, clean air, safe communities, easy and equitable access to nature, and protection from ravages of climate change. So a little bit of the reach that we have across the country. We have 8 regional centers. And like I said, I'm housed and nestled in the Great Lakes, and we cover Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan. So that's kind of like the Great Lakes based, and that is the core of our work. So we have a mighty team of about 30 something folks, ever growing, still in the pandemic, which has been a blessing. And we cover a large range of issues, or even at least solutions as well, right? So water, restoration, education in communities, wildlife, and climate resiliency. This was actually the last picture we took at our staff retreat, maybe I think last fall. So it's just cool to actually even just see this picture again, remembering us all together. Here's our mighty team of 3, and also Mustafa Asiago Ali, who is our VP of Environmental Justice. But our team of 3 is myself, Manya Holland, and Antonio Cosbe. And our mission as our team works to support healthy habitats and communities and inspiring the next generation of conservation leaders and stewards. So within that mission, we have actually 4 programs that we're leading out of the Great Lakes Regional Center right now. One is Sacred Grounds, which I'll be talking about today. Antonio leads our Detroit Leadership Environmental Education Program, which encourage and really helps empower youth in Detroit to think about their local history, environmental justice, equity, but also being leaders within the conservation field. And Manya leads and kind of oversees a lot of our work as well. So that's kind of a little bit of a breadth to our mighty team of 3. And Mustafa, if you don't know him, is a mighty, mighty, amazing change agent around environmental justice in the world. So if you have a chance to Google him, please do. So taking a step back on kind of our Great Lakes regional focus, and it's going to obviously range across different regions across the country, but really our main focus and the way that we even brand, talk about, and really speak to the work is really we're trying to protect drinking water, right? So when we're thinking about water quality, water access, water affordability, water justice, we can really kind of refer to the Flint water crisis, one of the key pivotal moments in our country when we think about many, many different facets of how we protect, preserve, and have access to water, as well as improving water quality. So when you're talking about, rain gardens and other types of interventions to help improve our water, as well as the Great Lakes Regional Center, that's another kind of pillar that we support and kind of work on. Another one is tackling the nature deficit crisis. So really thinking about all the time that we spend on our Zoom screens, and especially with youth, how we can reconnect back in nature in a healthy way. And so when we think about the information era and all the time that we spend in our homes, getting back outside is something that we really, really try to encourage with our programming as well. Restoring and creating wildlife habitats. And again, I'll talk about that a little bit specifically with nature, Sacred Grounds. And then controlling invasive species. If you see one of the pictures here, Asian carp is one of our huge invasive species crises and the Great Lakes. And it's one of the largest kind of invasive fish that jumps out of the water, hits people. It's not funny, but it actually is pretty, if you see some YouTube videos of Asian carp, it's really a catastrophic species that's hitting our Great Lakes, but we're doing some amazing work in the policy realm, as well as communication and a few other avenues within our regional center. So Sacred Grounds, just in short, it recognizes congregations, faith institutions, house of worship, and communities who both create wildlife habitat and actively link faith practices and caring for the environment. And I think Ellie's going to shoot you all the website for more information. And really common motivating factors to doing this work is providing people just avenues to connect to nature. Some people are coming at this from reducing their costs with stormwater bill credits, with rain garden installations. Other people are coming at this from a social perspective of how do we build resilient communities and togetherness and healing. Other people from an ecological perspective, right? So increasing wildlife habitat, seeing more monarchs in your backyard, seeing various pollinators in your nature spaces. And to me, most importantly, it's really creating a safe, peaceful neighborhood, natural green space for prayer and reflection. And that's really something that's been uplifted all throughout the program and all of our sites that we've had across our Great Lakes region, as well as in the Mid-Atlantic region, as well in Baltimore, Lancaster County area. So why native plants? And really the core of this program is helping support folks to think about, to plant and to increase native plant habitat in their areas. And I know I mentioned that already, but really here are all the different benefits from why native plants are important. It's not just ecological. It's a place for beautification. It's a place for improving quality of life and wellness. I think, Nona, you spoke to just the mental health and the things that the public health sector and how that connects to ecology. So wildlife habitats, it actually reduces stress levels. It had data around diabetes and different types of health concerns and the reduction of that based on native plant and wildlife habitat installations in their in people's spaces. So that's another huge element for encouraging people to start native plant habitat. Also providing people to connect to nature. So this is just a little bit of a backdrop of the why. And we can I won't read this out loud, but what is a native plant? It's basically a species of plant that has been in a region for a very long time, and it has resilient root systems, and it can actually withstand a lot of precipitation, weather change, climate change, etc. So native plants and native wildlife really rely on each other for survival and coevolution. Small habitats, big and small, make a difference. I think the conservation narrative has sometimes always been about getting out there, the big parks, the big acreage, the big everything, but really focusing on small scale habitat, whether you have a container garden apartment building, whether you have a small lawn, these elements, these kind of practices really make a difference. So the Sacred Grounds kind of key elements into participating in the program is to, number one, plant your native plant garden, right? Like we actually want hands to soil to create wildlife habitat on our campuses and properties. But most importantly too, we're educating and engaging our congregation and the congregants at the faith community and connecting faith and environmental stewardship. And then the biggest thing is connecting and taking those practices outward, right? So even if you're not a part of a faith affiliation, denomination, or never been to church in your life, or a house of worship in your life, these gardens can be a great way of a demonstration of connecting not only faith and earth stewardship, but actually encouraging more people to do these habitats and best practices at their residence, at their schools, at their community centers, at their libraries, et cetera. So it's a grounding kind of pillar that says that congregations and house of worship could be community anchors to disseminate these practices outward into the community. So as of now, we have, we're all over the place, which is awesome in the Great Lakes region. And to the point of Nikki, we are trying to expand this national. So right now, these are the cities where we have been giving funding, $1,500 for people to create native plant gardens on their properties. So Toledo, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Michigan, we just got funding in Cleveland. And we also have some house of worship that we're working with in Northern Michigan as well. So a little bit of background on how we've been able to support houses of worship that we're doing these deeper dives. And I say deeper dives because these are folks that we are giving funding as well as direct technical assistance with. So we are partnering with our Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, but also Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District. We're partnering with our Native Plant Wild Ones chapter. We're planning, we have all these technical experts as well as this $1,500 that helps people with these garden installations. So we provide that kind of programmatic support, but we also actually have some plant vouchers that we give to people who are not a part of congregations so they can start their native plant habitats on their properties as well. So the Bringing Nature Home workshop for homeowners and residents is a really cool way to actually have a great relationship with our native plant nurseries nearby. but also to support people who are not a part of these congregations to start their own native plant garden on their properties. So we partner with native plant nurseries and give people $50, very, very small. $50 is not, a huge rain garden or, wildlife installation, but it gets people started and gets their feet wet into what, maybe a couple black-eyed Susans, I'm speaking from a Great Lakes, Midwest perspective, but milkweed and some asters and a few other plants, just so people can get started on their properties. So that's another element for the program as well. So actually adapting to during COVID has been a blessing in a way that this work is rooted, I want to just say, in equity and justice, and creating opportunities for connecting youth and people for self-sustaining networks, and also giving a place for healing in a time, I think, in our history and our world, that people really want to get outside. So now more than ever, native plant nurseries are booming. People want to start different, installations with their gardens. So we've been able to do a lot these last few months of having virtual Bringing Nature Home webinars. So even still providing those vouchers to people for $50, but doing it in a virtual way, right? COVID-19 adapted engagement activities. So, hey, can you go on Facebook and do a live Zoom while you're doing your gardening, and getting people to engage virtually on a live, chat form. We've also still onboarded 25 houses of worship. We still have been planting and doing the social distancing. In the top right corner, you can see some folks with masks and actually blessing the rain garden that was installed in around June or July, I believe. So people are still planting. And we've also given away 153 native plant vouchers and food garden vouchers. So even in a pandemic, we've seen our numbers skyrocket, and people are still wanting to plant, get engaged, and love nature where they are. So just to give a little bit of context to some houses of worship that have been case studies, but also just, highlights of this program. The Glass City Church in Toledo, they had a sump pump that was running 24/7. And this was something that was hurting their bills, obviously, right? And also, if you can see, that's, the rain garden, that's actually where the water was captured. But before that, the water was going straight onto the sidewalk, across the street. And after this rain garden was installed, they were able to, alleviate their flooding issue. Their sump pump is not running 24/7 anymore. And obviously, this is a beautiful, stopping point where people are walking down the street to admire the pollinators and all the things that the function of the rain garden is doing. So I just wanted to highlight that particular site, which was really a cool intervention, if you will, in the Sacred Grounds program. And Ellie's going to drop in an actual our testimonial Sacred Grounds promo video. So this is actually one of the churches that has a story. And there was a drug house on this corner that had a lot of activity that was a really, not only a nuisance, but actually a danger zone in this community. And actually, after that house was torn down, or this drug house was taken off the property, they actually installed a prayer garden, a labyrinth of a place for reflection and for prayer. So this is a really, really, really healing place for this community that was once a place of violence and a place of, of sadness and a huge issue within the community. But now it's a place, as you can see at the bottom, a pollinator garden. I think they have some Wi-Fi hotspot, cool stuff. Now people are coming there to enjoy. So the People's Missionary Baptist Church, there's a Fall Community Day flyer. Just wanted to throw that out there as well. And there is actually wheelchair accessible food garden, kind of raised garden bed, if you can see in the right corner as well. And thinking about all the different aspects of privilege, right? It's not just race, it's not just even age, but even ableism is a huge thing to think about when we're talking about gardens and accessibility. So wanted to throw in that element of identity as well. And Christ the King Church, one of the houses of worship that were able to still plant in the midst of a pandemic. So that was also an awesome site as well. I'm not going to say too much on this because I know we're running out of time, but just wanted to say that green storm water infrastructure is a huge, not only solution for Great Lakes problems because of our combined sewage water overflow, but here is one of the sites that was actually able to install a huge rain garden to actually get rid of, or I'm sorry, to hold about 3,000 square feet worth of in size, but 34,000 of stormwater during a particular flooding event. So that's just something I wanted to throw out as well from a green stormwater infrastructure perspective and climate change, and how that's been obviously hitting not just parts in the West, but also in the Great Lakes from a water perspective. Just wanted to say equity and justice at the center of this program. Creating authentic trust-based relationships is vital. working on the land, with the land, for the land is healing and transformative work. And our Great Lakes Regional Center is really aiming to leverage environmental stewardship through these dynamic natural spaces to bring all people from all colors, all backgrounds, from all walks of life, all faiths, to be a part of the conservation movement. So I want to end there with questions. My contact information, feel free to get in touch with me, and I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I've been paying attention to what Sacred Grounds has been doing for the last couple of months, but I'm blown away every time I see you guys. So thank you so much for being here with us. All right, we're going to open it up to some questions now. If you want to go ahead and just unmute yourself and speak up, that works great. And then Ellie, if you could take a quick look through our chat and find some of the questions. I know they've been coming along, and every time I've had to jump off, I lose the chat, so I haven't been able to keep tabs on it.
Yes, well, I think all of the questions that were asked have been addressed except for one. And it's from Doug, who said, I'd be interested to hear more from our speakers about how they see the intersection of racial justice and environmental justice through sacred ground.
From all of our speakers, I can speak from the programmatic perspective. So, you know, I think from a racial perspective in EJ, and environmental justice is really thinking about access. And, you know, nature spaces usually, I mean, in thinking of like parks and other places of enjoyment in that way, people, especially given Black and Brown communities, do not have that access to get to those spaces. And that may be transportation, it may be, you know, cost, it may be a lot, and even just safe places and feeling safe. There's a lot of history around nature spaces not feeling safe for certain races. So I think that fundamental history has to be, number one, uplifted and acknowledged, that people of certain backgrounds just do not feel safe, given there are places in nature that have been historically symbolizing violence, by trees, for instance, if we well know what that is. So I think that's a huge acknowledgement that needs to be done from all environmental organizations and conservation organizations first. And NWF is doing a huge push for that. One thing about Sacred Grounds is really bringing this element to home, right? That everyone has not only access to it, but everyone has a right and a possibility to engage in nature where they are. You do not have to go on a bus and pay $50 to go to a national park, but you can create these pollinator habitats. You can see nature, you can see all the beauty, coyotes, foxes, elk in your backyard in the way that you can. So I think that connection has to be made. The acknowledgement of history, the acknowledgement of harm, the acknowledgement of where we're going, but also the solutions of allowing people to have that access within their own communities, and they have a right to. So I think that's where my heart is, but also I think the way the program, as well as National Wildlife Federation, is going in the way of engaging with communities in that space right now.
Yeah, that's great. I can add to that. We've done a lot of work here in Arizona with the National Phenology Network and the Arizona Association for Environmental Education, thinking a lot about that. And in addition to all the stuff that Tiffany just mentioned, the thing that we are working on is trying to build relationships and also better understand how people engage with nature and how they engage with their place, so that we can tell a better story from our perspective of, you know, Nature's Notebook or engaging people in the outdoors, and just think about the different ways that people have been not able to access things that other people take for granted. So that's where we've kind of been framing our work and doing a lot of research. We're also working on some research projects to better understand how we can teach others to be mindful about that not everybody enjoys the outdoors in the same way for a lot of different reasons, whether it's because they have not been privileged, because they've been marginalized, or just because they don't do it the same way that everyone else does. And teaching people to think about that, and when they're designing programs for people, thinking about, you know, maybe not everybody wants to participate in Nature's Notebook, but is there some other way that you can connect them to phenology or better understand how they connect to phenology? I think that's really important. So the key is really that relationship building piece.
Yeah, I would say from sort of our AZIPL work, one thing that I think has been really fascinating is working some with Chispa and with Eco Madres on the effort to really bring more of a tree canopy to South Phoenix and to most of the areas. You know, you've got all this water in Michigan, and that's your issue. Here we have no water. It's like 0.1 in our whole monsoon this year, 0.1 inch of water. So we've gone so many months without water. It's just mind-boggling. And so the communities that are really hit by these record heat and record droughts are communities that are underinvested in terms of parks and in terms of covered of trees, of just the tree canopy and, you know, beauty in the areas around them. And so there are organizations like Trees Matter trying to plant trees on school grounds and on, I don't know that they're doing congregational grounds, but public spaces more. Like their first priority is to be involved in planting trees in under-resourced communities versus, you know, more beautification in communities that already have parks and things. And I think that there's the city of Phoenix has a whole plan that is taking that into account too. And they have an effort to improve you know, I think double the tree canopy from 12% to 25% in the next so many years. So I think being involved in things like that, but I'm really impressed. I went on this walk, this water walk with an Indigenous woman from Michigan, actually. And what I was so impressed with, and we did this walk, this women's walk, carrying sacred water from the source to the end of where that water would end up down here in the valley. And they would stop randomly wherever it was the end of the day, and they would find like a corner in a parking lot that just had a couple weeds growing, and stop and recognize those plants there and how they were working so hard to grow. They were the native plants, some of them, some were invasive, but they were trying so hard to grow in that space. And it just makes you realize that there is nature everywhere. I mean, the resilience of nature is profound. And if just a pot on your back patio or on your windowsill really begins to connect you with that. And I really think that the research around the mental health and physical health benefits of being in nature, like your blood pressure goes down, your pulse rate calms, your breathing calms, you just get endorphins are just released with, they call it green light, but being in nature. And I think that there's so much to be done with that energy. And I think one of the best things about the pandemic is that people have all started paying more attention to what's right in front of them, because they can't go out and run around in the same way. And I think that's long-term really healthy for us all. But I wish I knew more about specific programs locally that are where we could, it's our effort at AZIPL to try to find those programs, network with them, and do what we can do. And I think the Sacred Grounds program is very, very, very powerful that way too. And that little bit of seed money makes a huge difference, just makes a huge difference. So.
Well, thank you, Nona, for popping that in there. And we are now at time, so I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to recap just a little bit. What Nona was talking about for our health benefits, think of how much we benefit the earth by having a garden. Those little teeny wings. LoriAnne said she's near the the Tucson Botanical Garden. She's only like a quarter block away. She's just right across the street from it. But if you're a monarch butterfly, that's quite a flight, So we need these little pockets of habitat in backyards. Absolutely. It's the pollinators that feed us, and we can make this world a heck of a lot better, for ourselves, as an investment in ourselves when we're investing in the earth too. So just to recap quickly of different things that gardening does to help with climate change. In Tucson and Phoenix, we're reducing the heat island effect by adding shade, whether it's micro shade under a small bush or under a palo verde tree. up in Payson, we've got catastrophic wildfires. We are reducing the amount of tree canopy and understory so that those wildfires that are driven by drought are less severe. Your climate mitigation is, and what's going on with climate change is very local based. Even just an hour different in the place that you're going could have a difference in what's happening in the extreme weather events for sure. So, planting natives, LoriAnne was talking about the seasonal changes. We've got animals and plants that have a symbiotic relationship that have to be aligned. And what we're seeing with climate change is that's getting disaligned. That's a huge, that should take thousands and thousands of years, and instead it's taking months and single years, as we're watching our temperatures increase. So that's a huge red flag for sure. So any little bit that we can do in the yard, and then heck, we're enjoying it too, and if we're creating edibles that we can enjoy, we can share with our friends, there goes, our food insecurity. And there's some justice that we can share with each other, helping each other to create those spaces where we can feel safe, where we can recharge spiritually, mentally, physically, and eat and grow. And I just think gardens are the answer to it all. Just that's the easy answer. So if you have a garden in your backyard or you want to create one, National Wildlife Federation has a wonderful program, the Gardening for Wildlife program. Tiffany's probably talked about it. I kept popping in and out because my internet was in terrible condition. I may die any second with my internet. But there we go. Thank you, Ellie, for putting that up in the chat. You can certify your habitat. It takes, there's a little different checklist. You need some food sources, a water source, cover sources, so and then places for animals to raise young, and doing some sustainable practices. And you might think the only great gardens are in the East. No way. We have amazing gardens here in the West. Phoenix and Arizona has been a leader in agriculture, so we can for sure do it. You can do it in your backyard. If we can grow lettuce in Yuma, you can have a garden in your backyard for sure. So certify that. They have a really beautiful, handsome metal sign. It's a couple bucks more, and you can get the AWF logo on that along with NWF's logo. And when you put it in your yard, people do stop and ask, and then you're sharing that. So, you can do it in your backyard. You can do it at your spiritual site as well. A lot of people talking about how do we create a sacred grounds program here in Arizona? Well, I'm your state liaison. I talk to Tiffany, and we try to see. We know we already have some philanthropy people tagged, going, hey, what can we do to expand that gardening for wildlife program? So we just need to hear, that you're interested, that you want it. What kind of connections do you have? Can we do vouchers? Can we talk to some of those native plant nurseries here in Arizona and get some vouchers going? Because we're going to spend a lot more than $50 on plants. That's how gardeners are, for sure. So thank you so much for coming, and our recording will be available in our chat. We've got a huge list of books and resources in that chat. It was just amazing. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again if you're interested in any more of these webinars, what you would like to hear from us. So with that, don't just stand there, plant something, right?
Bye, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all so much. Have a good
Great.
rest of your evening.
Thank you. Great to be with all of you.
Thank you, Ellie. You can go ahead and turn off our recording.
All right.